Hello, friends. A study has been conducted that reveals many important details about the Chinese Air Force, how China has completely transformed its Air Force in just about 18 to 20 years. This study began in 2007, when the Chinese Air Force had around 0.4 million personnel and nearly 2,700 fighter jets, bombers, and attack aircraft. But by 2025, almost 18 years later, the Chinese Air Force has around 403,000 personnel, while the number of fighter jets has been reduced significantly, from 2,700 to around 2,300. In other words, China has cut about 400 aircraft. But this is not just about reducing numbers. I will explain in detail how China has completely transformed its Air Force in less than 2 decades. There was a time when China had almost no special mission or support aircraft. The Chinese Air Force had very few support planes. Today, however, China is expanding this capability, although the study also questions whether the number of such aircraft is adequate or not. Before we dive deeper, one quick request. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please do so. The study shows that in 2007, China had 400,000 personnel and about 2,700 combat aircraft. But within the next 5 years, the Air Force took a major step forward. By 2012, the number of fighter jets had fallen to nearly 1,500, and personnel were reduced from 400,000 to 330,000. That means around 70,000 personnel were let go. The main reason behind the drop in aircraft numbers was that China retired almost all of its outdated jets such as the J-6, J-7, J-8, and Q-5. All of these older platforms were phased out, and China began replacing them with more modern aircraft. Some were purchased directly from Russia, such as the Su-27s, while others were produced under license in China like the J-11. At the same time, China started expanding its fleet of J-10 fighters, eventually progressing to fifth-generation jets like the J-20 and now moving toward the J-35. To give you some specific figures from 2007, China had 722 J-6 fighters and 756 J-7 fighters across different variants, including the J-7IB, J-7C, J-7E, and J-7G. This means that just these two models made up nearly 1,600 aircraft. The J-8 fleet stood at around 250 aircraft. As for the J-10, China only had 62 at that time. As a stopgap, China also purchased Russian fighters such as the Su-27, about 116 Su-27SK, and 32 Su-27UB, making around 150 aircraft in total. In addition, they acquired about 75 Su-30MKK. These Su-30S were similar to those used by India, although India's fleet was heavily customized and tailored, while the Chinese versions were more standard. China also had around 39 JH-7 aircraft at that time, and around 408 Q-5 ground attack aircraft. The Q-5 was not a long-life or cutting-edge fighter, but it was still a capable platform for ground attack missions and served China well. By 2012, as I mentioned earlier, China had reduced its fleet by almost 1,000 aircraft. This happened mainly because they completely retired the J-6 fleet, which had numbered 722 aircraft in 2007. By 2012, China had completely retired the J-6 fleet of 722 aircraft, reducing that number to 0. They also retired around 200 J-7 fighters. At one point, China had nearly 750 J-7s, but this was brought down to about 550. The J-8 fleet was also reduced. China had around 250 J-8 fighters in 2007, but by 2012, that number dropped to about 170. Meanwhile, the number of J-10 fighters increased significantly. In 2007, there were only 62 J-10s in service, but within 5 years, China began producing them at a much faster rate, upgrading their systems and expanding the fleet to more than 200. The Su-27 fleet, however, was reduced because these aircraft were not considered very capable by that point. The number dropped from 116 Su-27SK to only around 40 still operational in China. At the same time, China began producing the J-11 under license domestically, which was based on the Su-27 design. These aircraft were upgraded with improved avionics and Chinese systems, making them more advanced than the original Russian models. Within 5 years, China had produced about 150 J-11 fighters. The Su-30 fleet remained unchanged at around 75 aircraft. The Q-5 fleet was reduced dramatically, dropping from 408 aircraft in 2007 to just 120 within 5 years. After that, during the 2012 to 2025 period, the Chinese Air Force underwent even greater transformations. The J-7 fleet, which had already been reduced, was further cut down. Although China has not been able to completely retire them yet, around 250 J-7 fighters are still in service today. These will eventually be phased out and replaced by the J-35, but that will take some time. The J-8 fleet, which was reduced to 170 by 2012, has now been brought down further to around 40 aircraft. Meanwhile, the J-10 fleet saw massive expansion. In 2012, there were about 200 J-10s, but today China operates over 600 of them, including older variants, newer upgraded models, and dual-seat versions. China has introduced many improvements into the J-10 platform over the years. As for the Su-27SK, they were completely retired after 2012. The 43 Su-27SK aircraft that remained were withdrawn from service. The Su-27UB trainers, numbering 32, are still operational. In addition, China added about 100 more J-11 aircraft, which were significantly upgraded compared to the earlier versions, equipped with advanced radar and renamed J-11BG. The Su-30 MKK fleet, numbering around 73, is still operational today. China also purchased 24 Su-30 Mk2 fighters and 24 Su-35s from Russia. These limited acquisitions were mainly for technology transfer, which is why they were inducted in smaller numbers. The JH-7A fleet also expanded further. By 2012, the number was 72, but in the following decade this rose to about 200. The number of JH-7A fighters was increased to around 200. The J-16, which had not yet been introduced in 2012, was later inducted in large numbers, with around 300 added to the Air Force. Similarly, China also produced and inducted about 200 to 250 J-20 stealth fighters over the past 12 to 13 years. The J-20 has gone through several improvements during this time, starting with the basic J-20, followed by the J-20A, and then the twin-seat version. So, compared to 2007, China now has fewer total aircraft, but the overall capability of its fleet has grown dramatically. Today, only around 300 to 325 older fighters, mainly J-7 and J-8, remain in service, and these two will eventually be replaced by the J-35. Some Su-27 variants are still present, but these will likely be retired in favor of modern stealth fighters as well. In just 2 decades, China has completely transformed its Air Force. The number of bombers has not changed significantly. China had around 225 in 2007, and it has about the same number today. However, the bomber fleet itself has undergone major upgrades. The H-6 family, based on a Soviet 1950s design, has been thoroughly modernized with new turbofan engines, in-flight refueling capability, and modern cruise and missiles. China has even adapted the H-6 to launch air-launched ballistic missiles, including an air-launched variant of the DF-21. Additionally, China is developing a new stealth bomber, though details remain classified. One of the biggest transformations has been in the area of support aircraft. China once relied heavily on Russian transports, but today it has its own heavy transport, the Y-20. The Y-20 has also been adapted into an aerial refueling tanker and an airborne early warning aircraft with radar systems installed. Reports suggest that China has already inducted 50 to 60 Y-20s. Alongside this, the medium transport aircraft Y-8 and Y-9 remain in service. With these advances, China now produces its own heavy lift transports, a capability it once lacked. For comparison, in the U.S. Air Force, about 31% of the fleet consists of support aircraft. In China's case, support aircraft make up only around 17% of the fleet, with the rest being combat aircraft. This shows an area where China is still building capacity, but progress is steady. After aircraft, there are also air defense systems in which China has made very rapid progress, but I will discuss that in the next video. Otherwise, this one will become too long. That's all for today's update. Please subscribe and like this video.